Hi, my name is Ken Masterson. This is a video looking at a specific child with autism, and I'm putting it together as a teaching parents to fish from the acronym. You can give people fish to feed, but it's much better to teach them how to fish so that they can take care of themselves. So my goal is very much that, to try to teach people how to do the analysis using the microbiome themselves rather than depending on me or someone else to do it, empowering people. So let's get into it. The purpose is provide walkthrough for other parents to follow. So I'm going to walk through everything. I'm doing it with a sample which I have not previewed or looked at, so it's all going to be as I walk through. I'm going to observe things and notice things, etc. Things for your child will likely be different, but the process will likely be very similar. Personally, I am time constrained. I have a full-time job. I have family with health issues, and I'm getting up there in the years too, as you could probably witness. So I have time constraint. I have a large property that requires maintenance, etc. So I can't help everyone. What I will do periodically is do somebody where, for one reason or another, they seem to cross some magical threshold between um, some magical threshold where, okay, you hit a point which I think there could be a mutual benefit both to the person requesting it and in terms of providing general information. I do not like giving private individual one-to-one information. I rather create, as I'm doing here, a video or a blog walking through it. It's a better use of my time. More people will be helped by it, etc. So don't ask for private consults. You won't get a strictly private consult. And in general, I would encourage you to first go through the videos I've produced, like this one, before reaching out to me. Please, I want to have a bit of a life besides. Um, okay, key thing to remember is what my skill set is. I'm not a medical professional. I do not deal with autism children at all. I am a data scientist, deal with artificial intelligence. Where I thrive is ability to handle large volumes of information with software. I worked on some of the biggest databases in the world during my career and have often had to sit down and design messy, complicated databases for a variety of purposes, from school systems to commercial systems to medical systems. I have a great empathy for any parent or child with autism. I happen to be a high functioning ASD. I got very lucky. I know I got lucky. The right thing happened to fall in place, from just the right parents, the right MD, the right teachers, even the fact that in my earlier years, students would be seen but never heard, and the result was there's no talking in class at all, which for a autistic child works quite nicely. Not having to have conversations, just work on paperwork, hand it in, and you're done. And that was for me a saving grace, because the current high value on social interaction rather than on rote learning or the fundamentals of education made a significant contribution to my survival. I can give perspectives from inside, but only for a subset. I'm a high functioning ASD, which means certain type of person, I can basically have a good feeling for what may be going on inside their head, which they are unable to be vocal about. I've already done one post on my perspective from inside, and they add comments to it or whatever as time goes on. But I've tried sort of say, okay, this is from inside the autism box, what I felt, what was successful for me, and when possible documented it up with studies. I tend to be a studies person, also tend to be hopelessly blinkered, which is a characteristic of autism. I managed to use that blinkering to my advantage career-wise, because it meant that I could focus on very complicated problems and solve them, which made my bosses real happy and gave me a reputation of being a genius. Basically, I'm just a very, very blinkered autism person. So you get the right pegs into the right holes and things work beautifully. When you try forcing the wrong shape into the wrong holes, you're going to get nothing but frustrations. As with all medicines, natural and otherwise, always consult with experts who are experienced in their actions, interactions, contradictions, and potential side effects before starting this or any other supplement program which may be suggested. As a disclaimer, because basically I lack the licensing and I lack appropriate training or experience. So, apart from having been one. So, that is a caveat you should be aware of. You may ignore it if you want or whatever, but I need to state that and to state that I'm working from limited knowledge, although very specialized in certain areas. So the method I'm going to go through for this walkthrough is I'm going to first review two goal solutions, which are looking for supplemental vitamins that may be deficient according to what we know about the microbiome. Many of these items could be validated by actual lab tests or by hair analysis or some other way. You could see my bigger three-parter on an autism child, in which case we're using external lab results to interpret the microbiome. In this case, we are not using any external labs, we're just working from the microbiome alone. Then I'll review all of the end products produced by bacteria to try to identify where there could be a problem coming out of it. Now, end products ties into something else, which is DNA. On my autism blog, recently I just did a reference post for the genes, the DNA components, which have been associated with autism or specific autism characteristic. And here's a quick list of them. And the list is big. There are something like 500 separate studies reporting on investigations into what SNPs are associated. The DNA and the microbiome are connected. Often the DNA will cause certain bacteria to grow more or to grow less, so we end up with a very complicated relationship. DNA I can't do anything about. In time we may be able to do DNA modification successfully, being done with things like sickle cell now, just finally happening. Autism I think will be very long distance in the future, and if the person has been suffering from autism for 20-25 years, the degree of help is questionable. Hopefully it will be, but that's a question. So DNA creates one set of things that interacts with the microbiome. The microbiome is adjustable, fortunately, and the microbiome gives a portion only of the total picture. Microbiome and how to adjust it is based on what has been published, and there's a limited amount of what's there. There are drugs which have been used successfully with autism, and those drugs we may have absolutely no information about the microbiome impact, which means those drugs could well still be valid. The microbiome does not replace a comprehensive holistic picture of the thing. So keep that in mind. I'm looking at, as I warned you, a very hyper-focused autism-like analysis here. Okay, so let's go back and go on to the next. So the next three sections, the next two actually three sections, end products, molecules, and enzymes, deal with production of chemicals over or under production, which impacts the body, and which of course the body is probably going to impact the bacteria. The body will often send chemicals back to bacteria saying produce more of this, produce less of that. If this back and forth ordering and fulfillment gets fouled up, we end up with the case of having 500,000 VW bugs sitting on the dockside because nobody wants it, and we have to deal with 500,000 VW bugs that is not allowed to be sold, for example, or which nobody wants, or everybody's gone electric, or some other things. So, as with a economy, there's a balance between what is asked for, what is produced, and if there's a shortage of something, then you get a variety of behaviors happening. Sometimes one of the most interesting ones I've seen in studies has been there is a deficiency of something, but the blood test does not show the deficiency. When you go to the tissue and do a tissue test, you see the deficiency. What happens is with the deficiency, signals comes out to implement a rationing strategy. Think of this way. Imagine an army at war and people running out of food. Well, if you go and capture some soldiers and take a look at their kit, you find there's lots of food there. So what do you mean that the civilians are starving? They may be starving because all the food is now redirected to the army on the front line, which is a totally rational decision. The body behaves similarly. So there's a bunch of complicated relationships that are going on, and one has to be very careful not to read too much into any specific lab result, because it may be looking at one aspect only, like how much food is in the captured soldier's kit bag, and not looking at how much food is in the general population behind. Once we have gone through these end products, which are determined from the bacteria involved, we can move on and we will look at or look for any bacteria which have unusual shifts. This is a little bit more fuzzy because in general, many of these we will have absolutely no idea of their role or function. All we have been able to do, because of very recent scientific advances, is being able to identify them. That does not mean we know what they do. If we have the genes measured out in full, then the genes will give us information about the enzymes and molecular in general, but the full genome needs to be done for each one of the bacteria, and that has not been done in full yet. And there may be other gene functions which are still to be determined. So we'll review bacteria with unusual shift, being aware that we may have no idea of the role or the function. Once we have done all of that, we could move on to creating diet modification suggestions, which is changing a food or avoiding certain foods in the hope of modifying the microbiome to go in the desired direction, and have to be specific to what the goal is to have the end products, modifying enzymes, being produced much closer to normal, assuming that we find that they are abnormal. Again, this is looking at a slice. The slice could show there's no problem whatsoever, but it could still be a problem. It's just that our ability to measure or to understand is limited. So let's take a quick look at the child. Okay, the mother sent me over a bunch of notes. Two things strike. First of all, the child was diagnosed at 18 months. However, it was also mentioned that the child received antibiotics at 3 months. Antibiotics at 3 months, well justified in terms of risk assessment, also have a risk of really mucking up the microbiome, which is not subtle, and you could basically end up creating a nasty situation, which could be the case here. It could be that this child has very few of the autism DNA variations, but the mucking up of the microbiome is basically compounded or contributed to that DNA becoming profound. The child improved greatly when both gluten and dairy was removed, which is to me not unusual. Now, we have two things which I sort of stop and look. Those of you who have read my history or seen my other videos will know that although I'm a high functioning autism spectrum, I'm also a person who has suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome multiple times. We covered each one, and it was that experience that caused me to realize the role of the microbiome in chronic fatigue syndrome, and by inference and by recent studies published, probably in my original autism. So it has been very illustrating. But the next thing, the positive test for lying above reference for Coxsackie and EBV HV6, that to me is a strong echoes of what is generally found with people with chronic fatigue syndrome. Among people with chronic fatigue syndrome are neurological impairments, um, sometimes antisocial activity. The person just, for example, some people I personally know when they're having a flare will not be able to stand having a conversation with anybody. The sound of other people's voice will overwhelm them, or in fact, what I'm personally dealing with somebody with a microbiome dysfunction is the sound of me typing on the keyboard. If they are not doing the typing, is overwhelming, gives them headaches, etc. So basically, there's a bunch of things that can happen with chronic fatigue syndrome and microbiome shift that results in behaviors which are very similar to that of autism. Whether or not it is a separate class of symptoms caused by the microbiome, which is may or may not be specific to autism, who knows. But I noticed that the similarities here to me was striking. That is, all of these are also seeing chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, there is a alternative way of viewing with it, which is all of these are infections which people often will acquire and which the body will keep in complete check. If the mic and the result is when they are in check and you get tested for them, negative. But if your body's enzymes, metabolites, and other things are jacked, the ability for them to be kept in check goes down, and you suddenly will get low-level positive things like chronic Lyme, etc., will suddenly show up in the lab results. Again, it's a speculative model, but it is a logical model, and of course, with ASD, logic tends to rule over political correctness. Other characteristics are focus issue, a lot of severe OCDs, tantrums, a lot of rigidity, and not conversational. The those are also seen with ME/CFS in some people with that condition. So it's sort of okay. One I view as being 99% microbiome shift, and we have the same thing with this particular child. No social skills, get head pains all of a sudden, might be pans, which lasts for a few minutes, and will be fine again. Pans, one thing I would want to investigate is whether or not coagulation comes into play, because with ME/CFS, coagulation comes into play about 80 to 90% of the people, and what we may have is a transient low-grade blood clot which results in hypoxia in the brain, which now produces the PANS, and the blood clot is a transient one which self-resolves, and voila, the person is fine again. A more commonly understood one is something called a transient ischemic attack, a TIA. My wife suffered that for a few years back. Once we understood what was going on, modified her microbiome, and took appropriate supplements to reduce fibrin deposits and to allow the blood to flow smoothly. She hasn't had one for almost 2 decades now, but she was having them regularly before, especially when subject to any type of stress or other things. That would often be the triggering point for her. And we know stress causes the microbiome to change, and the microbiome changes means that the chemicals being dumped into the body changes. So we end up with this cascading effect going on. And often we end up treating the last stage of the cascade rather than tracing back and trying to resolve the original triggering event. Another characteristic is failure to thrive, low weight, a lot of gut issues, and acid reflux. Failure to thrive happens with a subset of people with chronic fatigue syndrome where they literally will waste away. Another subgroup becomes massive. They are unable to control the weight. We know that weight is governed by the microbiome, and the microbiome, well, I think one of the best studies I've heard is where they were obese and normal mice. They did a fecal matter transplant from the obese mice to the lean mouse who did not change the diet, just the fecal bacteria was transferred. And that lean mouse on the same diet suddenly became obese. So the low thrive weight also spells or smells of a microbiome dysfunction. Okay, so that's my first take on what I sort of see and what rings bells in terms of my own personal experience here. So we now go on to do the analysis. So log on to the site. We see the one sample in front of us, gives us information as to when this was done, gives how many bacteria identified. 615 is a good number. How many are elusive and rare? Elusive and rare could be the oddball bacteria, which we know nothing about. And there we have infrequent, etc. So you have half of them being uncommon as in unusual. In other words, that type of 50 over 50% being uncommon, that is falls in where only 16% should be. We have 50% falling in where we only should expect 16%, implies microbiome dysfunction. So let's go in and follow the formula which I've described, which is we first go to look at the to go. We go to change your microbiome and just click core supplements suggested. And what we have here is we have a percentile ranking, which means 7.5% means that 7% of all the samples across a wide variety of people and ages have less butyrate being produced than this person appears to have, and 92% produces more. And if we take a look at the actual values, we find that we are producing about half of the butyrate, which other people are. That means supplementing with butyrate or supplementing with a probiotic that is known to produce butyrate, for example, miraricin, is likely something that will be helpful. It will help balance things. Then we hit some interesting ones. We see DAO producing one at the top of the, oh boy, talk about overproduction. So those bacteria we may want to take a look at and see about reducing the bacteria associated with those. Those are within a normal range. Usually I use 15 and 85 percentile. Anything below or above may warrant looking at. Anything between that, forget it. Thiamine is high, so no need to do thiamine. Vitamin B12 is low, which is very different than the last autistic child I looked at, where it was sky high. So supplementing with vitamin B12, vitamin B2, but not vitamin B1. So you probably don't want to do a multivitamin or a B complex. You want to be very specific, especially since we have niacin again at sky high. Pathonic acid, 84% of what the medium, so I would not worry about it. This one is the number one, which is sky high. Biotin, again, 94% of what the median value is. I wouldn't worry about it. 91% same thing. So basically, you want to be absolutely explicit with your B vitamins, no B complex. You may want to make sure if you give a multivitamin, it doesn't have any B in it. Usually I dislike the multiples because you're not able to do much tuning with them. But we have two, B12 and riboflavin, as being strong indicators of two supplements you should do. Sodium butyrate or a probiotic that produce pyruvate like mirarecin is suggestion. So we have 3 suggestions from just looking at this page. We also see items of concern, which we'll come back to later in terms of seeing what can we do to reduce the bacteria associated with those end products. So that was from the to-go supplements. Next, we're going to look at the end products. And this is where we can start building up a custom hand-pick selection of bacteria which we want to modify. And each one that goes in the list is selected for a specific purpose or a specific goal, not a general, this is how you fix somebody, which is not specific to this particular microbiome. Everything is very specific to just one particular person. It may not apply to you. You need to do the test. You need to upload the results. You need to look at the results. Okay, so now we're going to go to end products outliers. We have the ability to show all the end products one by one, which sits over under this one, so you can look at all the end products one by one. But rather than going through all of those, I have pre-filtered the end products so that you can just see what needs to be changed and ignore the rest. It makes for a simpler existence for most people. So here we have the list of things where we have a issue. We have some items which are marked with probiotics, which are indicates that we have low value of that, and okay, then something's wrong here. I'll need to revisit this page later. But let's take a look, and if we go here and we click bacteria here, it will take us over to a list of all the bacteria produces serotonin by genus or species. And what you really want to do is look for whoever is way out of line, as in it. And guess what? We have two high numbers. We have Streptococcus as a whole, as a genus is high, but we also have specific ones which identify. Right now, those two together, actually that one too, and that one, accounts for almost all of the contribution. What we do is we add up all of those numbers one by one to get our estimator for how much is being produced. But so that tells us now which specific bacteria we are wanting to, in this case, reduce. If you take a look at one of them, like this one, the Sangres, we have 15,000 count. The average person has 29, and actually this is running off older data, and numbers haven't been recalculated, but it seems to be higher than any of over 1,000 prior samples. So we have some severity there, and I'll need to go and make sure I update this to stats, but basically you're off the scale. So we go up to the top, and we have this little magic button called Create a Custom Suggestion Profile. Click that, goes over, and when it'll send you back, and what you will see is we see a hand-picked bacteria here, which you can now go and view, and it identifies the bacteria which you have, which are high, in which case we have a whole stack of them which are sky high. Um, you, since they're streptococcus, your physician may be very interested in this result because of the number which are high. He may want to consider prescribing a prescription antibiotic for it, but I would urge a word of caution. He has to make sure it's a right one, and that gets a little bit trickier. Okay, but that's for one of them. We can now go back and take a look at the end product outliers. The serotonin is one which I know from studies on autism is a very significant player. We have a bunch more, and let's take acetate. I have a suspicion of what I'm going to see when I click acetate, and let's take a look. Oh, it's interesting. We have something which I've seen before. We have very high bifidobacterium, which is the acetate producer, and going through the list at the genus level, that's the main culprit. Everybody else is relatively small. And if you look down at the particular species, we only see one down there. And what that means is we hit a knowledge limit point, which is okay. A knowledge limit point is where at the genus level we're able to identify which genus it belongs to, which group it belongs to. But we not able to identify the specific species which are involved, which means there's probably an oddball species involved. Okay, what I'm going to do to illustrate this is go over to sample visualization, my biome view. And what it shows is it shows a hierarchy of bacteria and your count and what other people have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to bifidobacterium. As you can see, there's a lot there. Remember we saw streptococcus, and we can see all the red for streptococcus. And one second. Okay, here we have bifidobacterium, and as you can see, we have approximately 3/4 of a million bacteria in that genus, and the total in the sample is 1 million. So you're talking 75% are bifidobacterium. Do not believe the myth that bifidobacterium is good. With autism, it can be very, very bad. I've seen several people with sky-high bifidobacterium, and when they had the bifidobacterium being recorded over time, when the bifidobacterium went down, the child improved. So be careful of the generic health advice that bifidobacterium is good. It's good in moderation, but it is very lousily bad in excess for autism. And what we have overall is 3/4 of a million. And if you take a look up of all of the known species underneath that and add them up, you will not even get 100,000 of the 788,000. You will get 20%, 15% of them are identified. The rest of them are unknown. These are unknown bacteria, which means we have no idea what they do, etc. So in that case, we cannot target at a species level. We can only target at the bifidobacteria level, and that's the unfortunate reality of it. But that hopefully will explain to you where we hit a knowledge gap. Sometimes if the genus is marked as being high, but you don't see the species underneath it adding up, go over to the visualization and go to the My Biome View, which will allow you to view the hierarchy and see if you have indeed, as we have in this case, a tremendous amount of unknown bacteria at a species level, and that means we are forced to deal with it in a broader sense at the genus level instead of the species level. So that looks at acetate. We can go on to the next high value. Okay, these are basically man-made antibiotics. Sorry, bacteria produce antibiotics of different types, so they have high value, which is generally good. We do have something which is a low value. In other words, just basically antibiotic which is naturally in the human system. It is part of the control mechanism to keep bacteria in check, is missing. We could go and click the bacteria, find out which bacteria are involved, and take a look at the count. And you can see that grand total is 41,000. 25% is 167,000. So there's very little of it being produced. Blottia is one of your major producers. Streptococcus is one. Streptococcus is one of these two-sided coins. It produces too much of one thing, and in this case, this specific thing isn't being produced enough, which means we don't want to increase this one. What we want to do is increase other things in this combination. And which one is a little bit hard to make a judgment call on, and we'll come back to that shortly. If we go back here, we can just click on probiotics. It will see if we know any probiotics that are commercially available that produces this one natural antibiotic. And we find that we have one particular probiotic which is known to produce it, Lactococcus lactis, not Lactobacillus, Lactococcus lactis produces it. So it suggests that we may want to look potentially at probiotics that contain it. If you want to know how to find those probiotics, look up here and commercial probiotics, and it has a very comprehensive list. I'm adding more probiotics to it as I discover them. It gives the name and then what is in there, so you can look through that list to find it. Before you do that, get the full list done of all of the ingredients, so you only have to go through this list once, and you can hopefully find the best combination there, rather than having one which has a small amount, another which has a small amount. You want to try something which is a good fit to all the suggestions. So we can go on down and we can see things like, oh, bile is low value. Again, bile is one of these things which, from acid reflux and other things from the description, is absolutely logical. And if you take a look at probiotics, nope, we have no known probiotics which produces it. So unfortunately there. And we have low projects of other things. And you can go down through the list. And for example, B6, we have very high production of B6, which is something which we saw earlier. You can go in, click that, look at the bacteria, and say, okay, where is all the B6 coming from? Most of it is coming from bifidobacteria. Usually what I do is I look at the highest number and then divide it by 2, and anything below half of the highest number I ignore. So that means anything below 400,000 roughly I will ignore. We have 100,000 here. We have 280,000 here. So we could ignore them. That one is sufficiently high, close to the threshold that I'm going to be inclined to include that. And again, all we do is we just click that, add to the handpicked bacteria list, and we now have those into our composite. The high numbers, all these numbers are calculated about once every 3 or 4 days, which means in this case, this was a sample uploaded last night. The update program has not run today, or it may not be due to run for 4 days for this particular sort of function. Hence, I have a value which I can't have values which are off the scale here above maxing, and the reason is haven't had time to reprocess the data because it means going through every person's sample for every bacteria and do a lot of recomputation and a lot of computation. So if you are off the scale, that's why you're off the scale. It's because the data on the system is delayed so that I don't get a whopping big computer bill every month. It's bad enough how it is. Okay. So we can go all the way, and down the bottom is a little piece of joy, which is rather than going through going through them one by one and having to do a major hunk of research, I'll aggregate it for you. I went do all of them and see what we come up with. And what we have here is the probiotic. We had a large number of low ones, and if what we had was indeed common throughout all of them, then we would have a number matching the number of items up above. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 items here. The ideal would be some species which impacts 9 of them. We only have ones which are impacting 2 at most. Bacillus is one, which is a general description. And just one which is a more unusual one to find in probiotic, but it is available out there somewhere. Getting it can be a challenge, but it is available. Okay, so we have gone through that. We can go and do again check more things like bacteria, and again we find an old friend bifidobacterium. It's the main culprit. In fact, almost all the ones that are high are likely to come back to bifidobacterium. This reader can go and manually check that, but my general experience is that it ends up being a small handful of bacteria that accounts for most of the issues. Okay, so we can go through and let's do something, one more just for vitamin K. Hey, we have bifidobacterium again! Ta-da! And nothing else is close. So we find that almost all of the dysfunction is caused by the genus bifidobacterium, and to make it even more challenging, most of the species involved are not identified by the lab samples. In fact, there may be species which are relatively unknown in the general population, but may be characteristic of autism. Okay, so far we have done that one. Now, the next one on the list is the KEGG modular. Let me explain quickly what they mean. First, I'll flip the page up, and then let's go and explain what the KEGG modular is. KEGG modular means the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Gene and Genomes. They have sequence a large number of bacteria, very large number of bacteria, identify the genes and what each gene produces. So the result is we take the bacteria, we find the genes that are into specific bacteria, ideally at the strain level, and we're now able to count up what the end products or the components being produced by the bacteria are compared to other people, and see whether or not your values are high or low from that. And we are working strictly at the gene level. Um, the results may disagree or agree with lab results. If you take a look at my other autism child three-parter, we had in general agreement, but there were a few oddities happening there. Again, everything here is uh, cutting edge. It's somewhere probably a few years beyond where conventional medical science will be, even in a few years. And that's simply because I'm skilled at handling large volumes of data, complicated data, which is not usually what a physician or even a researcher is accustomed to doing. Happens to be my profession, and hence I can do it well. Okay, so let's go back, and that's where my data for the next two comes from, straight from that source. And we have that end products outlier, and we have the cake modular, and we have a relatively shorter list. Up at the top, as you can see, you can adjust the numbers up and down. If you adjust it up or down, you can get more and more and more. But I would never do that unless I found very little result. If I find significant results, and it's something like the bifidobacterium being berserk, to explain just about all the abnormalities, I'll leave good enough alone. Why add more things to the stew? I have a beautiful tomato soup. Why start tossing in other things to it? So we have some high values, and we have one rare value. Rare values are bacteria which rarely occurs, um, and generally we ignore them because it doesn't happen enough that we get any firm picture. We have a bunch of high values, and as before with the end product, to make your life simple, I just click here for the end product. Takes us over, and here we have a slight twist. The earlier one, we were working off a different data source, which was generally manually scanning PubMed articles and transferring data across. Here we're working from a database, but all of the information in the database is at the strain level. So the result is just a strain specific. Remember that big bunch of unknown, unidentified bifidobacterium? Those strains are not included here. We don't know about them because they have not been identified. We don't know what is in them. All we know is that in terms of end products, they jack things around a lot. So let's go down and take a look at what we have here. And we have a longer list. We have 69 lists, in fact. And for this particular item here, we have a lot. And now here's where the table or the web page becomes nice. You can just click that, and it was sorted in terms of order from highest to lowest. And it means that for this particular item, you have more than most other people do. You are at 100 percentile. And you can see a whole long string of them. Some of them we recognize. Hey, that's one which we have. And then there's other one. We have mycoplasma. Mycoplasma is there. But what we want to do is not only focus on the ones which we have abnormal compared to other people. We want to have ones which are abnormal with a high count. Again, first thing you may want to do is do a UR count. Double click it. So the magic number is half of that, which means 140,000. So we have that one, Bacterial vulgaris, which I recognize from studies on autism on PubMed as being abnormal often. Another one, Rheumacoccus, another one, which is half of that. This Villanella is technically below the threshold. We could include it if we want. Here we have another one, which is usually viewed as being good. You're at the 38th percentile. I've taken away the checkbox because to include it is probably going to be using faulty logic. I'm trying to prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot. So we have those three things. The first factor is percentile seen is 88.2. That means almost everybody has it. So it's common, but you have a very abnormal amount for something that's very common. 21% means 1 in 5, and that means it's less common, but let's just keep it there. Go down to the bottom, we find a little magic button again. So we click that, takes us back, handpick bacteria, and we have our short list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we are up to 8 out of 600 bacteria which we identify being significant. We barely at 1% of them. But these are likely to be the main culprit, which is nice to do. Nice to have a short suspect list, as any detective knows. So let's go back to the next one. The enzymes outlier actually means we're looking at 1,600 different enzymes. Let's see how many outliers we find. And we only find a few outliers, and again we'll go for the common high value. Sort by count. That's a threshold. We'll pick that one. I recognize that name already is probably in our list. Same culprit showing up. Imagine that. We can go back and go down to the next one, which is here. Again, we do a count. Same culprit is showing up again. And I'm not going to bother adding that in. And the last one. Same culprit. So we have all of our enzyme outliers being caused by the same bacteria, which is nice to know. Whole bunch of abnormalities, one bacteria. Okay, now I had not finished going through the modular one, so let's go on and let's go on to do the next one. Same routine as before. Bacterial bulgus is there and there, but those are the same ones we have actually added in already from our other analysis. So if you go here and sorry for that. We'll come back to that shortly. We can go on to the next one. Same process. Same culprits. Next one. Same culprits. Everyone there, all top 3 are already on our suspect list. And let's go on to the last one. Are we getting bored seeing the same suspect time and time and time again? Yep, you are. So what we have done is we have identified a small number of suspects for causing some of the issues. Okay, now we have also, let's go back to this page, and we have basically gone through the first 3 aspects. So we have gone through the to-go solutions. Say, here are some supplements and vitamins you should consider. Discuss with your MD, of course, before doing it. Review the end products, review the modulars and enzyme. From each one of these, we identified bacteria, happen to end up with a short suspect list. Next, we're going to go to bacteria with unusual shifts. We may have no idea of the role function. I want to show you the process. Whether or not you do it is questionable. This is the items with the least confidence of picking the right bacteria. So it is, if the above doesn't give you a bunch of good suspects, you may want to go here. My gut feeling is you already have enough suspects, but bacterium sticks out the sore thumb as the mastermind behind most of the other aspects. But still, for those who are not so fortunate, let's go over and take a look. The best way to identify suspect is visually. Again, over to my biome view. And you notice we have our magic button here, which will add bacteria into our magic list of suspects. And now we have the hierarchy there, so you can see where things are color coded, as in whatever has happened. We have here we have your count and the relative count. Here we have the number of samples which has it. So something which has 1,200 samples means most people have it. If most people have it and you're very high, it's an item of concern. Items which are here, like there's just 6 people with this particular bacteria, may only be one lab that identifies it. Labs identify different bacteria. So that means results are not compatible. You want to usually compare same lab to same lab if you are looking at changes over time. So going down here, we see some reds, but they are either low numbers here. We want ideally to have numbers over 600. So going down here until I see something which is over 600, I'm not going to pay attention to the reds. You can if you want to. I'm just trying to keep the number of faults we want. And here we have over that, we have high number. I can mark here. I already know that's on the list. I'm going to mark it anyways, just to illustrate. Going down, here we have another one, and here we have it at a relative height. Just as the species level, just as the genus level, just as the higher level. What we really want to do, and in this case, we're having problems because we know overall we have a relatively high count, which is actually relatively small count of this. And because this is relatively small, remember this is count out of the million, so we're talking about 0.3%. Then, because this is a small count, although it's a common count and you're high, I would be inclined to skip it, because we are not dealing with the bottom level, the strain level, which is where it really has impact, or the genus level, but we are working at a much higher level. So I'm going to skip that one. Again, looking down for any more over 600. And now we have some more which are over 600. And here is again, this is the level we are interested in. This is the higher level. We don't want to pick that in because we are basically going to be taking a sledgehammer when we just need a little tap. So we want to keep things as targeted and as precise as possible. And so we are down here. We have the combination. We have a whole bunch which are high, and some of them we have already added to the list. And we are wanting to make sure we add the higher ones which are to the list. This one I'm going to add in because it is the dominant player in the Streptococcus. It is 7 out of 47. It is 14% of the grand total there. And this would probably be the only other one which is a significant player, and of course the Sangringham, which is there. So we have picked the highest ones in this particular group, which is high, and the rest of them we are going to sort of leave alone because we really don't want to get too much noise happening. And we'll continue downwards. We could go and say, okay, we could try doing something here, but it's orange. again, the choices are yours. I'm trying to do a conservative, let's find the key suspects and not get distracted with trying to identify lookouts on the street, which are working for the criminals, which are likely to be less of an influence to stop the crime called autism. So we're going down. As you see, we had 600 different ones, so this visual display does help things up. Here we have number one, which meets the criteria, so I'm going to mark that one. Ones which are high and which you have very low of are there, but in general we want to have ones which are common and low. Roseburdia as a whole is count. It's this one becomes a little bit of an if. I'm going to skip it for the moment. We have another one which is high. It is a very big count. It is 104,000 out of a million, which is 10%, and it's high count, so I'm going to mark that one. And occasionally you'll see things like, wait a minute, this name is an attachment to Biblotia. Names keep changing for the bacteria. We use something called a taxon number, which the National Institute of Health maintains. The taxon number is a unique identifier. A name is a fuzzy identifier, unfortunately. So we can go there. Now, I could go and just open that to illustrate that. So, at one time, it evidently was classified into the other bacteria. Its parent is still listed there, so if you go to the parent text one, which is listed here, it goes to Blottia. So the Blottia is still deemed to be the parent according to the official database, although the name doesn't match. Don't be worried about it. I just thought I should mention it to you so you don't get too concerned about it. And again, we're looking for things that stick out like sore thumbs. We're looking for over 600 and high one. Here we have another one. Again, this is about 1% of the things we could or could not include. I'm going to include it again for purposes of illustration. Here we have another one where we are high, it's common, and can we identify particular ones? Yes, we can. We have one which really sticks out, which is here. It's rare. I have to track down why we don't have a bar chart there. This page I need to rework regardless. I already know we have that in there. And we go down here, and again we have a whole bunch of bifidobacterium. Only one which really dominates, I include that one there just for illustration's sense. Notice we keep going on and on and on for bacteria. Lots of stuff in the gut. And again, using the 600 criteria, whoop, we hit the end. So we now have a list of new bacteria to add. We don't want to have more and more because it actually confuses the samples. So we're going to go back here. If we take a look at the hand-picked bacteria, we now see we have 11 bacteria. We have increased our suspect list nicely, but not too many. Okay, next is getting suggestions from these. We now add the creating diet modification suggestions. And we're going to use the bacteria. We have selected our suspects for causing some of the symptoms, or what is the biggest contributors. The lieutenants of the crime family causing autism. So we have our list of bacteria, and we have only one genus. Everything else is at a species level because where they're coming from is either a species level or The ever source of information was at species level. So we have our suspect sitting there. And now if you go back to handpicked bacteria, there's a handpicked taxa suggestion. Handpicked taxa means bacteria. Um, and we click that, we take us over to the page. On the page, you have a ton of choices. So I'm going to run through a couple of variations. You can come back and play. I apologize. I give you too many choices for how to do things. It's intentional because there's a whole variety of opinions out there of what should or shouldn't be. So I will do that. But before I do that, I should go over and explain something. We have two things: quick suggestion and health analysis. If you go to health analysis, it is generic information, and the basic one is sitting here, which is from a naturopath in Tasmania, and he has a general purpose description. General purpose description is for general people. With autism, we have DNA issues involved, and suggestions coming from his goals of what things should do or not do is questionable, as in I mean, we do have some agreement, like bifidobacterium is not an idea, but what we have here is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 items which are not in the idea range, and it may be important, may not be important for autism.
Governor Hogan.
What I did or tried to do by doing handpick is the big
on the U.S. Capitol,
criminals,
died,
the high ones.
Capitol.
Now, with this particular list, you can actually go and see what you would get by just going up here and typing quick suggestions. Quick suggestions uses his list and applies the logic
mob
in a canned format. So for reference, I'm going to do that
storm the
and see what comes up.
and put the lives
And
he
so a bunch of disclaimers. It gives you 20 items. And what we have here is probability estimate, and that is a approximation using fuzzy logic of something helping. You have two lists. One is to increase and one is to decrease. So the increase and decrease has a max value of 1 just to normalize it. And then you have the values underneath it. So for example, for the increase, everything is 2, 3, 5. So before you start doing a bunch of those things, you should probably look at not doing some of these things because they have a higher problem. For example, the child improved with getting off dairy, which means reduce of lactose. And noni humantis is also common in breast milk, and one of the sugars there. This particular probiotic, which is not there, that's Wabase. Good luck getting an 11-year-old to consume Wabase if you can get authentic stuff, which is hard and expensive. And up top we have things that should do it. Garlic, vegetarian, which also as a side effect means no milk fat. Cranberry, walnuts. There is such a bacteria, however, it's available only in Europe and it's expensive. And we have other things on the list here. Then we have probiotics, which has been computed as likely to help. Culturelle is probably the easiest to get in the US. Digestive care is, I believe, the same bacteria species in it. There we have just one which I have see showing up more and more in autism analysis, which is one that comes from Japan, and it can be obtained by Amazon or direct order from Japanese websites. and then everything else is slightly lower impact. We have a mixed impact. A mixed impact means that what is in it will shift some bacteria in the right direction and some bacteria in the wrong direction. Mixed impact. In other words, it's a bit like Russian roulette. You're not sure what the outcome is going. So generally, mixed impacts are ones you would prefer to avoid unless they are the only choice you have left. We have, in this case, we have a bunch of choices up above, so those would be the ones to go for. Then we have negative impacts. These are ones which are likely to make things worse. As in, the impact on things that are bad will put every single item that are bad in the wrong direction. And then we have no known impact, which are A, for the bacteria selected, and these probiotics, we have no clue whatsoever as to what the impact is. Studies have not been done. Everything is based on PubMed studies, and PubMed studies haven't covered everything. There are decades, if not centuries, more studies that should be done. Then we have flavonoid foods, and we have rice being a high factor there.
We must not be in
Curcumin, thyme, cloves are there. And then we have curcumin, which is turmeric.
Lincoln, divided we stand.
And then we have another one called hesperidin. And if you click this one, it will take you and will identify which items has this particular flavonoid in it. So we have lime, oranges, etc. So you can see potentially about seeing what the response is to some of these foods. Now, the flavonoid is in these foods, but there's also a bunch of other things in it. Some of those other stuff could push things the wrong way. So the result is do it as an experiment. Add one in and see if there's any positive or negative results. For example, peppermint may have side effects which aren't expected. Oranges may have side effects. Lemons and limes, grapefruits, which often will interfere with other drugs, could have side effects there. Kiwis. Then we have dill reed, etc., which has zero here means that it's a very small amount. If it had below 0.05, I simply represent it as 0. So there is a little bit in there, more token amount. So that is what off the shelf going through generic make yourself healthy advice is. Not looking at these 11 candidates which are highly likely to be the most significant player, but just looking at everything and trying to do a magic solution for everything in one go. Let's go back and look at our specific example. Here we have our custom selection, and now we can go in and we're just going to first go in. We do have the ability to filter so that we could apply additional filters to only those which we identified on this side with citizen science associated with autism, or those which are associated with PubMed studies with autism. That may take it down to 0 or may take it too many. So I'm first going to do PubMed studies. And the reason is when we show the results in a new window, you can see that official studies find these free bacteria are too high in studies of autistic children. These are groups of children taken together as a group, not individually. What do we have? We have a pretty good hit rate. So we have identified by our different means, just looking at the microbiome sample, nothing else.
Bobby's wondering if
Free bacteria which are high and which other studies have shown are high in autism children. It's what's called convergence, which gets me excited because it means that this approach identifies things before medical studies are done. We are leapfrogging ahead and working from a different set of tools to come up with identifying the bacteria, rather than getting a collection of people, doing control sample, doing measurements, doing averages, and not only that, but what we are doing is far more specific. to this individual person. Okay, let's go back and take a look, and I'm going the autism one to what is based on things reported to the site. And this means that from people who have uploaded samples to this site and have marked autism, is we could filter by the bacteria which we have by statistical process identify as being probably associated with it. So let's see what we come up with. Again, I have not done this sample before. I could have nothing or could have a beautiful match. Let's see what comes up. The only thing which is common is bifidobacterium being too high. In other words, other people who have uploaded samples to this site, bifidobacteria is the main culprit. Okay, so let's go back. We know we have a nice combination of something like 11 here. I'm going to get rid of this because I want to be explicit to the person. Everything selected is the genus or species below, so that's good. And now I'm going to take a look over. I'm just going to toss a couple of things. I'm going to omit prescription others and drugs and others and antibiotics. I'm going to omit those intentionally. You can come back, pick those and see what comes up, or uncheck everybody else and just have those. So I'm going to do a more general one, and notice we always open up in a new window, so it's easy to compare one set of suggestions to another pair of suggestions. So we have here everything which we have identified, and we have identified now things which are there. You'll see some overlap from the other one, particular sugar, folic acid, and vitamin B12. Wait a minute. B12 and B9 were identified by looking at end products. We have also identified these as being from other totally different source, as being supplements which will help shift the bacteria which we identified. So again, we have what I love to find, convergence. And we have a variety of things like vitamin A. Some of the things like niacin is a low probability. My usual traditional threshold is 0.5 or very close to the top value of the take. Let's take a look again. We have a very similar set of items here, which I'm not surprised at. Wheat. Wait a minute. The child improved when they went gluten-free. Wheat contains gluten. Again, we have magical convergence. We have cacao here. No chocolate milk. Actually, there's no dairy. There's no risk of chocolate milk, which is a good. So by experiment, the mother has already found some of these items, and some of them actually have worked. Soy should be avoided. That's interesting because soy is usually viewed as being good. In this case, no. Inulin, another one of these. This is good for you always. Prebiotic. Nope, don't go. It will increase bifidobacterium, which you already have far too much of. And then we have probiotic mixture, Zippo, nothing. Mixed impact we have there, long list, and negative in black down below.
First, the president seemingly.
And there, one of the things I mentioned earlier, which was
Office.
the low butyric acid, was suggesting mirrorism, and mirrorism is on this list as a definite avoid. So although it produces butyrate, it also encourages other bacteria to go in the wrong direction. So although it seemed like a simple direct solution, it ends up being that probably sodium butyrate supplements is the way to go with this child, not using mirrorism, which is a butyrate producing probiotic. No known impact, the usual list. And then again, we find rice and cumin being the top ones. We have more flavonoids being suggested here. Caffeine, never too early to start somebody on caffeine. I'm Scandinavian. feeding coffee to a baby at 4 is not unusual. Okay, um, again, we have some of these items are items which you have to compare to other lists. B12, yes. Niacin, we saw we already had overproduction, so I would be disinclined to add that in. And then again, you can just click on each item and doesn't list anything there. Again, it depends on what data is available. So, and I'm mixing data from all sorts of different sources, reliable sources, as you can see at the bottom of the page. Well, not just one, but I do give this somewhere on the site of data sources I'm pulling from. All of them are what I would call least gold standard, PubMed, the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Genomics, etc. So I keep to the highest grade of information I can. I do not go off bloggers' posts. If they cite a study in those posts, I may check that study and then I will use that study. I will not go off somebody's opinion. I will try to keep as much as I can to hard facts. Okay, so that is pass 1. I'm going to go back because everything is happening at the species level. Is I'm going to go up to the parent, which means that items which impact the parent we're going to pull in. And the reason I do this is very simple. Often the studies, for example, things that reduce streptococcus won't identify the species that reduce. It will identify what reduces streptococcus as a whole. We have several streptococcus there. We don't have streptococcus as genus. I'm not sure if we do, but I'm going to go up a level for everything which we have identified by species only. So we are going to be working on the genus level and try to reduce things which are associated with genus. So this is a there. If we had a bunch of items which were genus only, we could use that to include things which have been identified specifically for a species. We have everything species right now, so there's no need to. And association is a little bit fuzzier, and I'll come back and show it to you. And let's go and suggest a new window. Let's see what we come up with. Here again, we list the bacteria which we are addressing. This is a new feature which is being added just to make it easy so that if you print off a page, you can see what was done on it. If you come back later and do another suggestion, you come up with different lists of suggestions. You can see if the reason is because different bacteria was associated. And again, we have very similar to the other. A few things moved up. A polypropylene moved up. Aspirin moved up. Aspirin, you of course have to be careful. Some people have salicylate sensitivity, and that will trigger it. Vitamin B12 has moved up. Polypropyl folic acid. Most of them are flavonoids. NAC has moved up. Melatonin supplement, which is not a surprise. Melatonin often shows up for autism. Item 2 decreased. We see similar to that, including wheat resistant starch, wheat bran, and positive impact. Locomotor again shows up, usually referred to as W. Flora balance is there, surveillance power is there. All of them are about a similar impact. And all of them is because of lactobacillus cerevisiae. You can buy it in bulk from Custom Probiotic, which is the best price per community forming unit of anybody. It's what I use. It's also doubly nice because it's pure probiotic. It has no fillers, no everything, but it does come as powder. And take the powder, take a scoop, mix it with slightly warm water, mix it, and then drink it away from meals. We're taking it. 11-year-old may or may not be amenable to it. It doesn't really have much of a taste, but you do want to keep it to clean water without any fluoride, which will impact the bacteria and slowly increase the dosage, very slowly increase the dosage, because there could be die-off effect from it. And then we have, of course, the mixed impact, etc. So that covers the main aspects which I wanted to go. We have done our go-to solution, identifying probable end products that should supplement, saw some which probably shouldn't supplement. We look at the end products being produced, identifying the ones which are the most extreme, identify that bifidobacterium keeps showing up time and time and time again. Look at molecular enzymes where it wasn't bifidobacteria always, or some other things showed up, so we included those in. We also did a visual wander through to identify ones with unusual shifts, given that they are commonly seen and that the number you have is abnormally high and you have an abnormally high percentile. So preconditions are the preconditions to selecting it. Once we have that, we can flip over to take a look at the suggestions from it.
Friend,
Now, I want to go back one more time to do
must not break our hearts.
is look at antibiotics. Many people say, absolutely no way. In this case, this person's child may have been adversely affected by antibiotics. We have some bacteria there which the reaction of most doctors would be to prescribe antibiotics. What is try to discover what
language and rhetoric.
statistically is probably the best. So that entering a little bit of an intro is I go back and what I do for the very first pass is uncheck everything. And go for antibiotics. I could also perhaps include prescription others, which are other drugs which could be used off-label. Let's include those just to see what it comes with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck that. So I'm going to work with the net I can to try figuring out what to do next. So we have here 4 probiotics which has the highest probability. We also have things down below which are things to avoid. For example, proton pump inhibitor. Because with acid reflux, doctors will often prescribe proton pump inhibitors. They would take the microbiome the wrong way. And if you want to, you can click through, go through, and it gives the impacts, etc. And down there, let's type. I'm going to type in one of the bacteria. Here we have bifidobacteria. What does it do? It says it increases it. Oh, wait a minute. Isn't bifidobacteria our biggest problem? And now you're going to make it worse? And what evidence do I have in that? Click that. And you can follow through to the data source. So the bifidobacteria using proton pump inhibitors is a definite things. Rifamycin is rifamycin is a yes. Watch the names carefully. And it goes down the list, and you can get a bigger list if you want. And then down here we have other things. Remember, most probiotics would help, but there are a bunch which would definitely not help. Commonly will help with chronic fatigue syndrome. Does not appear to help here. So interesting for a patient's mother to walk in with a list of probiotics to take and not to take. But that's what the available data suggests, and you can trace back to the actual study to show the impact. In this case, for the one the non-probiotic, the proton pump inhibitors, the causality was absolutely clear. It increased bifidobacteria. We can go back this one and see show suggestion in the window, see if anything changes. Again, I apologize, I give you too many choices. Often the choices will be the results will be very similar, convergent, which is good. If there isn't convergence, then you are left either with the item being something which only by looking at one way do we get this item, which means it's good. But if we have disagreements between one and the other, as one says take, one says avoid, my general advice is avoid. Go conservative, or to be more precise, do no harm. And then again, we have and one particular antibiotic hits the top of the roof, which is that one there. And then we have other ones down below. Now, on the probiotic name, you can go over and see what the impact is, and then we have 676 studies where it's referenced for one thing or another, and you can go to the source study involved in it. So information is there, massive amount of information. I've tried to focus myself on the least complex path through, but also explain get there for the more sophisticated things like suggesting which antibiotic to take or which non-prescription drug to take or prescription drug to take and which ones to avoid, which can be helpful because the doctor set of thinking. The microbiome shift is usually totally outside of his scope. He doesn't consider it. He doesn't consider it as a factor. Just like does, use it and discuss with your doctor. Point him to the side. Share with him the login if you want. But the whole thing is, I'm trying to increase. My goal is to increase the odds of beneficial things. The logic may or may not be correct, or fine print in all the organic processes involved may be missing key points. But compared to conventional medicine, I would say my odds are than the typical family practice doctor's odds are. They are trained to go from cook. Why I was told never to go into medicine, because I'm simply too creative. I think outside the box too much. So I think at that point of time, I should do a quick summary of where we should go from here, or where you should go from here. Okay, so my approach is to add another dimension into the treatment of autism and a variety of other autoimmune difficult diseases, including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, neurological conditions, etc. I'm adding another dimension. I'm not replacing what is already known out there and what may be working out there. It is adding a different aspect. The benefits of this approach is that we are not waiting for a clinical study to be completed, peer reviewed, and published. What we're doing is we work off a logical model starting with a microbiome, where possible looking at the genes which the particular bacteria have, identifying where it is likely, not guaranteed, likely that there's over or underproduction of chemicals that the body uses. Those chemicals shifts knocks the body out of whack, resulting in a variety of symptoms or autism symptoms or other symptoms, and we are trying to address that. Now, for you to do that with your own sample, with your own child, I would suggest you take your PC, go into whatever room you have TV. Hopefully you have streaming services like Roku and can go to this video on Roku, put it up on screen, and having just video playing on your desktop, you step by step walk through the steps I done and take a look at what comes up. Take plenty of notes, write down the notes. if something is extremely unusual, don't be afraid to drop me an email. The keyword is extremely unusual. So, and again, I'm trying not to make trying to keep a regular day job. Okay, and take care of the wife and kid and free quarters and everything else. So that's basically it. Try walking through step by step using just video, probably on your TV with some streaming service, your desktop or laptop, and walk you through step by step in parallel so you don't get confused or lost. And it's easy. You can do a row back, row forward, etc. Okay, I think that's the end of Just Talk. I think I'm ready to take a nap or have a couple more cups of coffee. Okay, ciao.